Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum. And today we are in the York Auditorium because it's really cold outside because it is the time of year that camellias are blooming. Go figure. What do you know? Today we have a program for you. We are going to go deeper in the garden. We are going to be talking all about camellias. We've got our director of horticulture, Greg Paige, and our research technician, Tim Alderton. They've got a whole bunch of samples of lovely flowering camellias and some that are even interesting just for their foliar characteristics alone. So it should be an absolutely beautiful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I'll pass things over to Greg and Tim to teach us a little something about camellias.
Yes, a good topic for this kind of cold weather. Tim and I have been going back and forth all week talking about this is a very important garden plant, first and foremost. Definitely here, definitely in the South, has a lot of those traditions in it. Lots of nurseries that I've visited have focused on that, and we've got some really good ones here. We'll talk about that. But I want to give you a really quick outline, which is mostly for me to kind of keep it in front of me. We've got a lot of cool things to show you, some good samples and some pictures, but we're going to talk about those things, some of the uses of them, a little bit of the cultural things to look out for with them. Tim's going to dive into the different types, and I've got some sources where you can find them, some mail order sources, and then we're going to launch into all the pretty pictures that we have of some of our favorites that we dug for pictures of, both out in the garden and in our massive, gigantic photo database that we have here. So it's an important part of our collections. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many we have. We've got some.
We're just barely scratching the surface of what
we definitely are, and I think part of that is just space. You know, we've got some old historical ones. We've got a lot of new ones planted in the garden. There's always room for more. We're linked into some really good sources, and some of the best uses of them when you're thinking about using them for your garden, they're great companion plants. Mm-hmm. You know, people typically think of them as a good shade garden plant. They definitely are, but they can take sun as well. But they're good with azaleas and rhododendrons. They're good with hydrangeas. They're good with mahonias.
They grow underneath pines.
Right. They're one of the few things that can grow under pines, big mature trees. They're a great companion plant. They can take a fair amount of pruning. They're used for tea production. We'll talk about that later. But I'm always surprised that people don't do that more. They can be used for hedges. They're great for screening. I dug for pictures of espalier. They're a great plant to do that on a barren kind of wall or a space, and particularly if you live in a part of the world where they might not be hardy. That's a good way to get a camellia into your garden, is to espalier it where it's a little bit protected. And they're good for specimen plants, having those great big gorgeous flowers, and we'll show you some of those in a little bit. Want to talk real briefly about some sources of those, and then I'll let Tim talk about some of the types. We're very lucky in North Carolina to have probably some of the best camellia growers that I'm aware of. From a retail perspective, Camellia Forest always jumps to mind. Decades and decades of crossbreeding and breeding different cultivars and different types. They have done a lot of stuff with tea at Camellia Forest. Another one that jumps to mind, our good friend Pat McCracken at Garden Treasures. I have to credit him with really getting me interested in camellias at an early age. Another one is Nurseries Caroliniana, Ted Stevens. I was lucky to do a talk with him many years ago. And if you've ever been lucky to be in a lecture hall with him and can keep up with the rapid fire pictures that he shows, he really got me interested in some species ones, which I'll show you some pictures of a little bit later. But great sources of camellias there. Gosler Farm and Nursery, my good friends. I was just out there a couple months ago. They're on the West Coast, but they're a great mail order nursery. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Sistis Nursery, who are also out in the Pacific Northwest, our friend Sean Hogan, and Woodlanders. They're another nursery down in South Carolina that has a wealth of interesting old ones and new ones, and there's tons of wholesale places. Tim mentioned Cam too.
Yeah.
Greensboro, gigantic nursery that grows mostly camellias. But the big picture is there are a lot of them out there, and they're easy to find. And we hope we give you, almost in our amateurish version of this, because there are a lot of people
We're
that know them.
touch the surface.
We're just
on
going
this.
to barely scratch the surface on what's out there. But we hope you get the fever for them, because they are a great addition to the garden. There's big ones, tall ones, all different types. With that, I'll let you dive into the different types, because people get confused. Which ones bloom in the spring, which ones bloom in the fall, and then there's all these hybrids that makes things even more confusing. And then there are species ones. So I'll let you dive into that rabbit hole.
I'm going to start out a little even earlier. I'm going to get into a little bit of the taxonomy.
That's great.
They're in the Thayaceae or Thayaceae, however you want to say it, which is the old name for Camellia sinensis, was Thea sinensis. So, which that incorporates, the Thayaceae incorporates other plants, some of them actually native here to the southeastern United States, like the Gordonia. If you go out to the coast, you're going to see Gordonia lasiandra, which Blawley Bay or something like that.
Yep.
I think is a common name for it. It's extinct in the wild, but the Franklinia alatomata, which was originally from Georgia, that's also closely related to that. Another genera that you may have heard of would be the Stewardias, which we have native ones of those here. They're also in the Southeast Asia. There's another genera I don't even know of, Hardia, which is very closely related to the Stewardias, but only occurs in Asia. And then you get to the group that includes camellias. So there's three main groups, I should say, of the Thayaceae. And like I said, then there's the Camellia group, which includes Polyspora, which used to be lumped into Gordonia, which the Polysporas are they're trees from Southeast Asia, evergreen trees. Then Pyronaria and Tuturia, which we actually have a Tuturia in our nursery right now in full flower. Don't have that up here. I don't think I have any. I don't know if I have any in the garden right now, or those are not. But and then there's a funky. Those are Southeast Asian. But then there's this other Laplacia or something like that, which is tropical America, which I had never heard of. So, but that family itself makes up about 400 species or so. And of that 400 species, approximately 220 of them are camellias. So it is a major part of that whole family. And going back to that 220, there's over time they've gone more or less of the higher or lower numbers for the number of species of camellias, and at times it's been as few as 80, but that could have been before they were when they were just being discovered. I don't know what the statistics on that, when that was from, or as high as actually some of the more recent findings, and maybe 280 species itself, but most are saying the low 200s. So. But they're primarily found in tropical and subtropical areas of Southeast Asia, the camellias that is, but they do go into some of the warm temperate areas as well. And they can be found anywhere from sea level to about 10,000 feet. So really wide distribution there of where they might be found. And it's conducive to what we have here in the southeastern United States in reality. So, and digging a little even more deeper into Camellia, I won't, with those 220 species or so, it's broken down into about 14 different sections. And there's about two or three of them that are important for us, that being the section specifically called Camellia, which includes our Camellia japonicas, which are some of the most common ones that you think about flowering in the spring. And I think it is, Paracamellia, which is the other really big one that it's kind of important, includes Sasanqua. The Camellia Sasanquas are just Sasanquas that we typically think about flowering later in the fall. And then there's a couple others like the sinensis, which is where our tea comes from, is in the Thea section. But there's a few others that are being grown as well now, but those are the three main ones that have been very important, probably for the last couple hundred years. But here in the United States, we've only been growing them probably, I think, since the late 1700s. I think they brought them in, and into England as well. But Camellias in general were started to being cultivated more than 1,000 years ago in China, and not long after in Japan. And they started making selections there. And then they actually started to cross them, mainly the japonicas and the Sasanquas. And you got some interesting hybrids there that have been around now for 1,000 years. And there's been hybrids made, and I'll talk about a couple of those here in just a few minutes. That it's kind of convoluted. I don't know how they actually separate them out, other than some very minute characteristics. But they all seem to be about the same kind of hybrids, but different names. So that's the basic stuff there for those. But going back prior to human history, apparently, Camellia had a wider distribution than it does today in the wild. During the oldest fossils go the whole way back to the Eocene, which is about 56 to 33.9 million years ago, somewhere in there. They found them growing in Japan, fossils from Japan. And then they've actually found them as far west as even in Eastern Europe and Bulgaria, and even further west, if you think about it, Washington state. They have found fossils from both those areas that date to the Oligocene, if I can spit that out right. So about 33.9 million years ago to 23 million years ago. So they have found fossils that fit that time period in both of those areas. So they have been around for a long time, and they do very well here in our climate in the southeast, but not those. Those are all extinct. But it's not a wonder if you think about it because of that. They've had time to fit into those niches, and those time periods were probably very similar to what they are here in the southeast now. So in the wild, camellias are often shrubs or small trees. They can get up to, I saw references up to 30 to 45 feet tall. But at a lot of places today, they've been clear cut, more or less, forest, and they will come up and grow as shrubbery, more or less, or in fields in the wild where they're found in the Southeast Asia still. Due to deforestation, that's been how they continued to persist. And they had not totally been studied because they're often in these areas, for instance, in parts of China that are very difficult to get into in the mountains. So there could be more species than that 220 or 280 even that I remarked about earlier on. So but that's just your basic, I guess, the natural history part of it, and how we kind of got to the human history and where they are today. We use Camellia sinensis is probably the most one. You probably have it at your house. We have tea, and a box of tea here, which we have them sitting around. But in our staff building, Camellia sinensis is probably one of the most widely planted plants in Southeast Asia and most economically important species. They aren't growing them as ornamentals as much over in that part of the world as we do here in the Southeast United States. So with the japonica and stuff, they're growing the Camellia sinensis for production and not for its beauty, though we do use that here as for its ornamental value. But here in the garden, we are doing mostly ornamentals, and we have a selection of them in the garden, which in reality, I'd say we hadn't looked to see what we had in the garden at this point. Let's say 100 or so.
That sounds about right.
But whenever I also was looking up, I found one stat that said that there's approximately over 20,000 named selections, which that could be any of them, any species or cultivar, which we'll get into a little bit later. But there are name references for over 50,000 of them, but some of them were the same plant. So there was synonymy in that.
The only thing that comes close to
crazy.
The only thing that comes close to that might be
or iris,
roses. Thinking of woody plants. That's been bred and made so many different ones for the ornamental uses of them.
So yeah, or rhododendron is another. But
sure.
It's crazy numbers associated with those, and. So we just have, like we say, just scratching the surface whenever you take into account that there's that many different ones. But we really aren't growing that many different species here in the Southeast, though we are getting to grow some more of them. There's a bunch that are too tender for us to grow, but there are some that are totally hardy here. And so in front of me, I have one of the first ones, and this is the most common group. This is Camellia japonica. This is actually the specimen I have in front of us here is a branch from one that JC and a group from, I think, the National Arboretum in Longwood, and there was another garden which I'm blanking on. And about 1985, if I remember correctly, went to Korea, South Korea, and they collected these. And these are considered some of the hardiest forms of Camellia japonica. And so selections of this from this trip they took actually grow up into, or they were growing them in central Pennsylvania. Even. So up into zone 6B. And so this was used for some of the germplasm to get some of the hardiest Camellia japonicas available. And but this is just the wild type. I love this one. This is one that starts flowering typically for us in November, and I will still see a few flowers on it into April most years with no problem. So really long flowering, and it's indestructible. The flowers will get damaged, but there's always a few more buds. But that's your wild type right here. And then there's hundreds, if not thousands, of cultivars of Camellia japonica, and I just have literally a handful in front of me here. So I'll start showing you a few of those. So one that's been around for a very long time and fairly well known is Camellia japonica, Professor Charles S. Sargent, which is, I'm not going to get into the different forms per se, but I will mention some of them as we go along. An anemone-flowered Camellia japonica. It's just this nice rosy red color and has these petaloids in the center. You'll find that when it's been around, I'm going to guess since at least the 50s or 60s. I'm not sure whenever that was actually named after him. I didn't look up the references on dates on some of these, but this is a typical size for some of the camellias here is a couple inch blossom that you'll see on a lot of the hardy camellias that we grow.
They named
here.
this one when he passed away,
So,
whatever that date
that
is. I can't remember. Charles Sargent was the very first director of the Arnold Arboretum.
Okay.
So that was quite a while ago.
And then another common one, if I can reach it over here, and actually I'll just use this as reference later on, but after I get this out of here. I have too many in here and they're gonna get caught. And this one might not stand out at all, but we'll see. Does that work? Okay, this is another common one that you'll find available. Camellia japonica white by the gate. It's an early flowering white one for us here. And there are some issues with that being the white colored camellias tend to get chill damage and show it readily.
Yes.
So they will turn brown on the edges even if the whole flower isn't damaged. So it can
they look like dirty tissues.
Yeah, exactly. But I managed to find this on Monday and pick it before we had the cold night the last 2 nights. That's for all, I picked all these on Monday. So I was hoping they'd hold up. This is one I found underneath some of the foliage, but it's, they're continuing to flower and but white by the gate's an old standard. Like I said, it's an earlier flowering one, and it'll flower off and on through most of the winter. Another one that we have similar to this in the white garden, I can never remember which order of the words. It's either white perfection or perfection white.
It's perfection white, I think.
It doesn't flower until March, April, and into May. So it almost always misses any chill damage to the flowers, which is really nice about it. But it is a lot later, and the flowers on it are spectacular in that they're always perfect. I call them a formal double. This is probably what would be a peony form or something like that. I'm going to leave that one there just so I can show the size that some of them get. So those Professor Sargent and white by the gate are pretty standard sized ones. And then you have ones like this. This is, I'm going to put them, let's see if I can get this here. You can see those right next to each other. This is one that we have called Reg Ragland. And this is one that I find really cool. It's the biggest flowered one we probably have in the garden, though. I'm sure you could get some complex hybrids that might include another species called reticulata that might be bigger, but we don't have any of those here in the collection.
This is a good example, too, of why the families are so important and why Tim mentions them. whenever he talks about plants, you look at that flower, and especially with this big size, you can see the similarity between Franklinia, you can see the Stewartia, you can see all those related, how closely they are related, and that's a great way to learn the plants. And there's other characteristics too, but just the morphology of that.
Those yellow stamens are very characteristic.
Very characteristic, very standard.
But this is one you'll see. This Reg Ragland would traditionally be pure red with the yellow stamens sticking out on it. But this has white splotching on it, and that brings up something which most would consider negative, but it is not necessarily negative in the Camellia world, or viruses that plants get. And there's been studies done on these now. They can't isolate what's causing these viruses. There's multiple viruses causing these. But anyways, the camellias will often show yellow splotching, especially on the Camellia japonicas, and I think it must be the sinensis. The Sasanquas, I think, are fairly resistant to it. This one here, the foliage on this is pretty clean. You'll get either some yellow or white splotching on some of the foliage. Sometimes it's not traditional variegation, like would be marginal or flecked. Like I'll show you some variegations later on.
Very inconsistent.
Yeah, it's very inconsistent. Some plant might not show it at all, but then on the red flowered ones will show white splotching on the flowers, which is actually considered desirable by many people in the Camellia world. So they will actually infect their plants sometimes, though it can intentionally, whether by grafting is one of the common ways of doing that. But it's the virus is not necessarily good, to have it, but it doesn't weaken the plant to any extent that it's detrimental to the plants most of the time. So it's considered fairly acceptable.
It's an aesthetic thing, both in the foliage and the flower. It's not going to do anything physiologically to the health of the plant.
I don't like it on the foliage, but I love it on the flowers.
I'm in the same boat. I'm in the same boat.
So you'll occasionally see pure yellow leaves or partially yellow leaves or splotching on white splotches on the leaves too. The white ones, you only can see it on the leaves if it shows up, because the viruses cause a white a whiteness to it. So you never know on a white one unless you see it on the foliage. And they recommend, if you don't want it to spread to your other Camellia japonicas, don't plant, and one's virused, don't plant it next to one that's not virused. But they said it's almost impossible to clean them up to get rid of it, but you can trim out the worst branches if you really want to. But I just find it's not hurting the vigor on this plant. I was looking through our photo collection earlier today, and this plant, when I started working here 19 years ago, was about 4 or 5 feet tall.
It's a monster now.
And it's about 12 feet now, and it's just covered in flowers. And it has the virus all over the flowers, so it has not affected it. And I only rarely see yellowing on the leaves on this one. It's pretty much asymptomatic, excepting when it's in flower for that one, at least on our plant. And it can vary. Going to another Camellia here. This is one, I have to look at the name on this one. So I have a crate down here. So when the flowers shatter, I don't have as much of a mess. These aren't as pretty. I do have this one in the photos I put. This is one that we have in our lath house, which it has very subtle variegation to the leaf if you look really close. It probably doesn't show up even in the photos. I didn't look at that, but this one has a bicolored, a picotide type flower, which is kind of interesting, but it will also throw pure red flowers. And so I think this is, a lot of the Camellia japonicas in particular have these things called transposon that happen. It's like if you've ever seen Indian corn, that every kernel's a different color and it has stripes and stuff on it. The Camellias have the same thing in a lot of them. And some selections will have 4 different colors of flowers on the same plant. Some will be striped, some will be picotide, some of them will be peony double, some will have cut edges to the petals, all on the same plant. They're just crazy. And this is one that does that sometimes for us. We've had this plant in the lath house for several years, and it'll have pure red flowers on it. But then right next to it, there'll be one of these picotide flowered ones. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. And Camellias will select some of these sometimes if they are more stable And there's gotten
rename them.
multiple cultivars out of the same plant. That is kind of interesting with them, that they just mutate so quickly, and they're remarkable in that. But again, it doesn't seem to affect their vigor or anything. It's just something genetically that they do. So
They're showing off.
yeah. So that's most of my collection of the flowering japonicas that I have here. The other common one that you're going to see most of the time here in the Raleigh area are the Sasanqua group, which most of them flower in the fall. And I should have said most of the camellias tend to be later in the winter flowering, though there are selections that will flower in the fall as well. But this is a Sasanqua here. This is one Camellia Sasanqua green 01-006, also known as in the trade as October Magic Carpet. This is one from Bobby Green, who's a breeder and plantsman from the Gulf Coast area, I think Alabama?
In Alabama, yeah.
And he's introduced a ton of really good landscape camellias, and this is one of them. It's a lower growing one, and so the Sasanquas, I don't have a pure Sasanqua here, but they tend to be the fall flowering camellias that we have. They tend to be more sun tolerant than the japonicas. The japonicas may yellow out if they get too much sun. I didn't mention that in their characteristics. So they tend to like a little more shade. The Sasanquas could care less, I think, most of the time. You may get a little heavier flowering if it is in full blazing sun.
And I think they take pruning a little bit better as well.
And I just laugh, though, commercially they plant them in landscapes around parking lots and stuff, even
Yes.
around here, and they come and they trim them in September, like weeks before they would have flowered. And they chop off all the flower beds. So you're probably all around you. You just don't realize it because they get their heads chopped off before they can do their thing, which I hate to see, but commercial people don't necessarily know what's in their landscapes. They just see it as a green hedge. But this is a nice low-growing one. Our plants are maybe 3.5, 4 feet tall by 4 or 5 feet wide.
A lot of these that he has, and they're called the October series, are really, really nice plants. Great colors and durable landscape ones, as Tim mentioned.
These typically, the Sasanquas don't either. I don't know if they can carry the virus that I was talking about with japonicas, but they do not show it typically. The flowers on japonicas tend to hold fall off the plant in one piece. Sasanquas will shatter, is a really easy way to distinguish them pretty often. So if you're not sure what you have, the leaves tend to be smaller on them too. But just interesting plants that are some of the most common ones that we use here. They do flower from, anywhere from, say, late September until January for the most part. You might get a few that hang on a little bit later than that. And this one's just coming out now, and I was laughing because
not October.
It's not October, and it wasn't flowering in October for us this year, but it's just in full bud. The flowers are showing some signs of chill damage, but they'll be the ones that are closed up will be fine. And that's another thing with a lot of the camellias. If you stay in the upper 20s, 27, 28 is around the range, you'll start to see major damage on them. Below that, they'll really show the chill damage on the open flowers. The ones that are tight, unless they're white, typically don't show much damage and recover a few days after a hard freeze. So those are the two main groups of camellias, the japonicas and the Sasanquas. And then there's these hybrids. And there's a couple that are interesting. That you may see, and this is one of them here. This is a Sasanqua, or not a Sasanqua. This is a Hymalis. This is one called Green's Blue, which is from the same breeder as that one that we just saw. This is a Hymalis, and I looked up information on Camellia Hymalis, and this and another species, which I have over here. I'm going to get out at the same time. This is Camellia vernalis, and this is one called Egal Corkscrew. But anyways, the parentage on these, they're ancient hybrids. Whether they occurred in the wild, I don't they don't even really know, but they're both theoretically crosses between Sasanqua and japonica. But they have different characteristics, and that's kind of how they have separated them over time to delineate Himalis and Vernalis. The Vernalis tend to be spring flowering. They have flowers more similar in reality to the Sasanquas, but to me, the foliage is much more like that of the japonicas.
Yeah.
And apparently, if you got real close, the stems are glabrous, or that is, the twigs don't have hairs on them, and the leaves don't have hairs on them. And that separates them from Sasanqua. And then on the Himalis, I was looking up, the thing that delineates them is they have leaves that are smaller than japonicas, but really very similar. Flowers are very similar to japonicas, but there are, let's see, there's some color tones that you don't get traditionally in japonicas. True pinks and whites don't occur very often in straight japonicas. This has more pink tones in it, so and you can get some whites. And in this case, this blue tones that give this more of a purple tint, and this green's blue. And also there are hairs or pubescence on, let's see, it was some, I have it on here. So it's some part of the floral structure, and I'm blanking right at this moment. But anyways, so it's really detailed on how they distinguish between them. But they tend to be a fall and early winter flowering ones in my experience. So this has been flowering around for a while. But this Green's Blue is truly one of my favorites that we have here in the garden. And it's a seedling from Shishigashira, which is a really common pink one that you'll see. I see them actually going on Blue Ridge Road here, just north of, near Rex Hospital. There is a big patch of them planted. It's a great landscape plant, 3 to 4 feet tall, and maybe 5 feet over time, and maybe 6 or 8 feet wide. It's a low growing one. And that's not the way all the Himalis are, but some of them are, you know. And the Vernalis, we have some of these, they've gotten great big. I think another Vernalis I have, and it has smaller leaves than this one here, is Rose of Autumn, or is it Autumn Rose? One or the other. But heavy flowering, flowers more in the fall for us, though it does continue into the spring as well, or winter as well. These are a little more sun tolerant than true japonicas either way. They get that characteristic from the Sasanqua blood in them. And some of them are just super heavy flowering on some of the Vernalis. That Rose of Autumn is one of those that I remember when Doug was here, he would say, if we had planted that in the sun, it would have flowered so much better. And it's just dripping with flowers. And I have this in the darkest spot behind the necessary, and it's just flowering its head off. And it's just a remarkable plant as it is. And I didn't know when I planted it, because that was pretty early on when I started working here, and knew very little about camellias coming from the north. But the Vernalis and the Himalis are both great ones to use in your landscape. This one here, I kind of alludes to in its name, and I tried, let's see if we can see it. I don't know. I'm going to flip it over here. This is one, it's a Gao corkscrew, and it has some twist to the stem.
It's more noticeable when you're looking at the whole plant.
The whole plant, yeah. So what I'll show you some other oddball things here now that we have in the garden, and including one, I'm going to just jump to that just because of it. I have one here. It's not flowering yet, but this is a Camellia japonica called Curly Lady. And you'll see, this one's super easy to see the curl to it, I think. How's that come up on the camera? Is that showing up? So this is, I think this is a semi-double pink flowered one to a double pink flowered japonica, which is just coming into bud in the garden right now. But there's different characteristics that you can get other than the flowers that can give you some interest throughout the season on these here. So that was just one that kind of caught my eye as I was walking through the garden. Going to back to a Sasanqua. Here's a gold leaf Sasanqua. I don't think here, I can't remember. I'm sure there are some variegated Sasanquas, but I don't remember too many of them, and we don't have any in our collection. But we have this gold leafed one, and this is Camellia Sasanqua Uganda. And on the sunny side of it, it is always bright yellow. On the north side, or the shaded side, it tends to be much more green. It has a good sized, probably a 2.5, 3 inch flower in the fall. And it's a nice, just a soft pink. It's been shy to flower, but it is starting to flower. But I think it's gonna, the big one we have in the garden is gonna either get trimmed back severely or removed from the lath house as we renovate the lath house here in this winter due to construction things. But I have some other ones planted in the garden now too that starting to grow. But it's a bit slower growing to get established, but once it has gotten established, it has been a really good grower, but not a heavy flowerer. But it does glow in the sun. Throw some of these over here and we'll get to some more. And I'll get some other hybrids in here in a little while. This is just a funky one. This is Camellia japonica, variety rusticana, and then this is a selection called, or a cultivar called Madoka, which sake glass, is that what you call it? Or sake cup?
Sake cup.
Sake cup.
See that
which
here?
it has these funky leaves on it that are bizarre. The plant is not, I hate to say it, it is not the most graceful looking or anything.
No, you're being kind.
Yes, it is one to grow for its uniqueness. The leaves are totally, like this one is actually totally closed
almost
off.
entire.
You could drink something out of that. Not a lot, but you could drink something out of it. So there are these other characteristics that some of them are grown for. And let's see, here's another one. There's several forms like this. This is one called Camellia japonica quercifolia, which they'll either call them fish tails or mermaid tails on them. They have this crested tips to the leaves instead of the traditional this pointed tip. It'll have multiple, 3 or 5 little lobes to the tip of the leaf. This just has a simple white flower, nothing spectacular on that one, but I'm sure there are some other ones.
The oddity of the foliage.
Yes, let's see, who do I have? Oh, so this is one, this is a japonica, and this is Benton Shiratama. If you see Benton on a lot of them, the names, those tend to be variegated ones, if I remember right. Several of the ones that we have in the garden have Benton in their name, and they're actually variegated. So it has ornamental value even, in the foliage, even when it's not in blossom. And I don't even remember what the flower looks like on this one.
either.
It's probably pink in double, is my guess.
Yeah.
But so some characteristics. So going on to some other hybrids that and species later on here that we alluded to. Another important hybrid, Camellia williamsii, Mary Christian. So the williamsii are crosses between Camellia japonica and, let's see if I can spit it out right, Saluanensis, which was brought into Western culture or into Europe, England in I think the 20s or late teens or early 20s. And it was growing at, and I'm going to mess up the name. It's a Carhays Castle in Cornwall. They were growing some of it out, and I think, which Forrest was the one who brought that back into England. But anyways, John Charles Williams, who owned the castle there in Cornwall, he had a collection of rhododendrons, as well as he was getting a few in camellias, and he
Nice magnolias too.
yeah, there as well. Okay, in 1923, he actually made a cross between Camellia japonica and this Saluanense. Saluanense. And he got seedlings that flowered a couple years later. And those were the first Camellia williamsii. And so the Camellia Mary Christian, which I'm guessing is on the screen right now, wasn't one of those resulting crosses he made, but was a later cross. I didn't look up the total history on that one, but that's one we have in the garden. There's now been hundreds, if not over 1,000 selections of this similar cross now. But these are some really good garden-worthy hybrids that were some of the first that they could grow pretty much throughout England. They do great here for us or at least some of these are doing great for us here in the southeastern United States, though there were remarks that they aren't always happy with the heat, but they are hardier than the japonicas. And you get some of these really floriferous hybrids that tend to flower over a very long period. For us, Mary Christian, it's just starting to come into flower now. It'll get frozen off and on through the winter, but you can guarantee within 2 or 3 days after a freeze, we will have a whole new flush of flowers on it for a good couple months. That is just a simple single pink flowered selection. There's double flowered ones in as well, but most of them are on the pink shades. There might be some white ones as well, none with red tones that I've was able to find. But another one that we have, and you'll see a whole plant in flower, that is out near our winter garden. And that's several years ago. It has grown so much. Mary Christian has as well. But you can't see on that picture, this is a mutation of that Mary Christian, and it's a variegated one. And now I have some foliage of that right in front of me. It's holding pretty tight right now, the one in the east. There's a few blossoms on our second smaller plant right next to our Mary Christian. But this is just a really nice landscape plant. It has a gold splash down the center of the leaf and has been a really good performer, just like its parent, Mary Christian, that it mutated from. So that's a really good group of camellias if you can find them. I think one that's donation, I think, is an old a cultivar of Williamsii and is a double flowered one that is fairly widely available here, even in the United States. There's been a lot of work done with these in Australia and England, where there's a lot more cultivars of the Williamsiis that we aren't necessarily growing here in the U.S., but they do so well in those climates and are better suited for, at least for England, where their summers aren't as hot as ours. So anyways, that's another group of the hybrid ones. And let's see, now we'll get into
Species.
some species. Actually, I take that back. I have another one that I need to do here. It's a hybrid. And this is not a good specimen. Look up Cinnamon Cindy for me, if you would. I have that. That's just an Ackerman hybrid. So this is from the National Arboretum. And I think this has a little bit of fragrance. And I was reading the fragrance, they were doing breeding for that in the early 70s prior to a hard freeze that they had around 1980, which wiped out a lot of their hybrids. So then they went to the hardiness breeding instead of scent breeding. But this is one, and I have to look up the other parent of this one. This is a japonica crossed with luchinensis, which is where the fragrance comes in this one. But there's a couple other similar ones. The nice thing about Cinnamon Cindy, it has a small flower, and again, it's fragrant. It's just this white, kind of a rose blossom, or apple blossom-like coloration. It's white with pink blush to it. The plant is very upright. So you can put this right next to a sidewalk in a wall, and it will go straight up 15 feet and 3 feet wide, maybe 4 feet wide. It's very thin, just and tight plant. We've had it outside the lath house for so long, we don't even have an accession number that really tells me when it came. We have these artificial ones for old things like that. But anyways, just a cool one that came out of some of Dr. Ackerman's breeding at the National Arboretum. So now I'm going to go back in again to some of the species. And as I alluded to earlier, tea is probably the most common camellia grown in the world, if you think about it. Just not so much here. And I have two different forms of tea, or Camellia sinensis, here in front of me. We have this funky one, which I had to look up. I looked up the name. I thought, is this wrong? But it's correct. This is one we got from Ted Stevens in Nurseries Caroliniana. It's called Camellia sinensis ocuns. And I looked up Camellia sinensis ocuns, and actually ocuns was the authority for Camellia, aside from Linnaeus. He did a revised thing with this and got his name associated with it. So I thought, is that wrong? But no, this is an introduction actually from Camellia forests. But it has this great yellow splash, I'm assuming is viral, to the newer growth most of the time. It does green out most later on. It could be that it's not viral either. I don't know, but it's a big-leafed one, and it's very different from many of the other Camellia sinensis that we have grown here at the garden. And then I have another much smaller growing one, which is Camellia sinensis silver dust, which is a speckled variegated Camellia sinensis. So the traditional Camellia sinensis is just a plain green leaf, but leaf size is probably closer to that of the silver dust than to the larger leafed forms, which I believe is probably Camellia sinensis macrophylla is what I was finding out about. So, but these are ones that would more traditionally be used for tea, and though I believe all camellias have caffeine in them, so regardless, you can get some caffeine out of whatever you make, but they do use make teas out of more than just this species. Even Camellia japonica and Camellia Sasanqua, they will make teas out of in reality. And that kind of goes to some of the uses that I didn't get to earlier on. But tea is one, as well as tea oil, which comes from the seeds of many species of Camellia, including oleifera, which is just a simple white flowered one, but they do use that one more readily to squeeze some of the oils from. In Asia, they use the oils in cooking, but they are often also used for machinery to keep things sharp, I think is what I was reading on the blades and things. But it has really good, I guess, not medicinal, but health benefits to it too. If you're using it, it's pretty good for you to use some of the tea oils. And another picture I have is of the fruit of Camellia Camelliana, I believe, and that's a picture. I think that's Mark's hand.
It is,
if I remember correctly, and that's at a garden that we were at in southern Georgia, actually, several years ago for an IPPS meeting. And the fruit on that is the size of an apple. I mean, it's enormous. So the seed quality on that one is really good. You don't need as many of them to collect as you would for some of the other species of Camellia, though most of the fruit on them, I mean, they might be the size of an acorn or a small plum, an inch or so, but that Camelliana is enormous. So that goes to some of the uses that we don't even necessarily think about. And so you have some other species that you wanted to talk about too, but these are two that we have in our collection.
Go ahead.
These are some of the small flowered species that I find really cool, and I did not put any good pictures in. I had a picture of the Camellia Whirlinga Bride, which is this one over here. Is Whirlinga Bride, which I did not look up what its parentage is, and I should have. I've neglected that. But we think of the camellias as mostly these large pinks and red blossoms that are enormous, but these are so much more delicate. These are some of the lesser species, or used species, not lesser in reality, but these are or in hybrids, and I think they're in the section Theopsis, which several of these smaller flowered ones are becoming available, and it includes, I'm guessing this might have cuspidata in it or something like that, or Fraterna, Hendeli. Those are some of the species that have been important in of these smaller ones, as well as I mentioned Luchinensis earlier in the breeding of the cinnamon cindy. That's another from this group of the smaller flowered ones. And one that I don't have a picture, but did you have I should have gotten was Camellia Crimson Candles is another small species hybrid with, I think, a reticulata. If I
Reticulata and Fraterna.
In Fraterna? Okay, yeah. So those, they often give, to some of the hybrids, they give these smaller flowers that are often all along the stem and often in clusters. And you can see that again in this one here, which is not open yet. But this is truly one of my favorites. This Camellia Arina is the cultivar. But the buds on them before they open are often just looks like they have lipstick on them, and they open up to little white 5-petaled flowers. And the leaves are so much more delicate. They do not have the coarseness that the japonicas have, which are so much grander if you think about it. But these give a totally different look that you don't see.
Much more delicate.
Yeah, it opens up a whole new world for camellias for us.
Yeah.
So what others do you have?
I only want to. I want to get to questions. There's 2 species that I would love to share, and I've grown to really like those for all the reasons that Tim just laid out. I like the smaller flowers; they're much more delicate and intimate. I like how they're all up and down the stems, and some of it is bloom time. One was Camellia odorata that I had some pictures of from my garden in Charlotte when I was there. I think I got that from Camellia forest. It blooms really early, and you would guess by the name that it is fragrant, but a really kind of nice white, delicate flower. The edges are really, really, really pretty. Nice, clean foliage. Wider than tall. The one that I had in Charlotte, I had planted near the edge of one of our ponds, and it was close to a road, so you can see it from kind of some different dimensions. Just really, really pretty. One of the first ones to bloom for us. And the other one that I wanted to share was Camellia grigicii. That's another species that's kind of unusual, but that thing was an absolute flower machine. Again, more wide than tall, nice white flowers, not as fragrant as odorata, but fragrant nonetheless. But every single late winter, early spring, just covered from top to bottom with species. And for me, it's kind of another area of a very commonly used plant that could be explored a lot more. And that's why I like them. You don't see them as much, and when you see them, it really knocks your socks off. The one that Tim was talking about with the red, it reminds me of like little rubies. So, to me, you're getting that look before it flowers. And it's that kind of multi-dimension kind of effect of them that I really like about the species ones. That's a whole lot of camellia talk.
There was so much more we couldn't even talk about too. But I really haven't talked a long time.
No,
that's okay. Let's talk even more about it, shall we?
Yeah.
We've got good questions here in the chat today.
Good.
Okay, we'll start off with one from Rita. She has a bit of a preamble to it. She says, "In my rented property's garden, there is a camellia planted alongside roses and gardenia plants. I have observed that the camellia looks stunted but healthy. It started budding in early November but doesn't flower. I fertilize it regularly. According to my property owner, this condition has been ongoing for at least 3 to 4 years. Could you please provide some suggestions on making it bloom?"
It might be over-fertilized. Camellias don't need a lot of, planting them at the right depth, not over-watering them. Those are the 2 most important things for camellias.
For me, I'm looking, not family-wise, but going up order-wise. They're closely related to the ericaceous plants, which are often associated with fungal things that allows them to deal with poorer soils.
Yes.
And those understory things. So it could be too much of a good thing. You're making that plant happy. So it says, I don't need to really do anything. I don't need to flower. I don't need to reproduce.
If a lot of times, and this comes up a lot, we get these questions a lot, especially in Hort Hour. The fertilizer will push a lot of growth and not the flower growth. Nitrogen pushes growth. If the fertilizer has too much nitrogen in it, that's going to be a problem. You need phosphorus for flowers.
Other thing that could be with it, I wonder if it could be a fall flower. It could be a Sasanqua, being that they're growing it with roses and stuff. Yeah. And I wonder when it's getting pruned.
Well, that brings up a good point too. when you mentioned that, I see that in a lot of commercial landscapes where they do, and I think the same thing every time I see that. Don't prune them for a couple seasons. Let them do their own thing. They don't need to be pruned. And I would back off on the fertilizer. Give it some mulch, so that it's got something to help keep the moisture in the heat of the summer, and particularly if it's an understory plant where the big plants might be pulling a lot of water away from it. But I'm guessing it's over fertilizer.
Yeah,
that's my best guess.
It's a pretty good guess.
Yeah,
I'll second that even. Okay, Marilyn wants to know with regards to the Tofuku Benten camellia. What flower shape would you call that?
Which one was that? My japonica?
I believe so, yeah.
It would just be a single. It's a single.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
I don't know. I did not delve into that. I mean, we just truly scratched the surface on camellias with this. We could talk for hours on them and not get through it because of
And we're not camellia experts.
Yeah, we're not camellia experts. And so they have, I don't know how many different categories, but I would just call that a single.
Fair enough. Absolutely.
It had 5 petals.
The best thing that I would encourage people to do if you're new to gardening, even if you're an avid gardener, is just go to one of those sources and look at the pictures that they have, or the Camellia Society.
Yeah, the Camellia Society, American Camellia Society.
They've got a really good website with all the ones that are certified, and just look at those different flower types that you might be interested in. There's a flavor for whatever you're interested in, and we didn't even talk about the peony ones or the
formal doubles, the cup-petaled ones.
Yes.
And the same plant will throw off 3 different forms.
There's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down to in horticulture. And I think next to daylilies and irises, camellia is probably one of the next biggest ones.
All righty. Ellen says that her camellias have T-scale. How does she treat them?
So the most common insect pest for camellias is probably scale insect. And first and foremost, the easiest way to inhibit that from happening is keep your camellias happy and healthy. Make sure they're planted at the right depth, that they're getting enough moisture, they're not getting too much moisture. You're pruning them at the right times. You're not pruning them at all, quite honestly. You don't need to prune most of them. So keep them stress-free, because stress causes insects to flock to plants. If you do get scale, it's very easy to control with a horticultural oil, and you want to try to get that to cover particularly the underside of the leaf. That's where most of the scale are going to be. And you may need to do a couple of treatments for a couple years to get it under control. That's the simplest thing to do. If that doesn't take care of the problem, then pull the toolbox out for some stronger, maybe some systemic insecticides that work. But I always tell people to go to the horticultural oils first, because that's a really good.
They're not really dangerous to use. So
they're not dangerous to other insects. They're not dangerous to you. You don't want to do them when it's super duper hot. Typically, and also I try to tell people this, right now you're not going to do a lot to them. The best time to treat scale is when underneath those adults are eggs. When the eggs hatch and those insects come out, it's called the crawler stage. That's the most vulnerable stage of that. And look at those scale, in early spring when those eggs hatch out. That's the best time to treat them.
Cool. All right. Dennis says he may have missed this, but are Camellia reticulata going to be discussed?
I don't have a whole lot on those.
Yeah, we don't have any.
We don't have any in the garden.
Yeah.
And so I have limited experience with them. So they grow them more towards the coast, I think.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. I've not done a lot with them. I have not had them in other gardens. And where I have seen them is Charleston and places like that.
Cool. All right. Ashley wants to know, is now an okay time to plant small potted camellias in the ground, or would you suggest waiting until spring?
I would, at this time of the year, I would wait till spring. If you did it now, and particularly with the cold snap that we had, there might be a chance for them to desiccate, to lose moisture, and you don't want to do that right now. So I would wait till a little bit closer to springtime.
I was reading an article on planting them further north, actually, but if it's quite small, I think it would be more pertinent to that, and being that the type of the year. They said normally they would say plant the camellias in the fall, especially down in this area, and let them root in before we have a hot summer. But in that case, I would wait probably till late March and early April when we warm up. Just because they aren't well established, and then they will desiccate, especially since their root system is going to be all in the top couple inches, where we actually sometimes do freeze.
Okay. And it's going to be cold.
Whole month it looks cold.
Tim was looking at long range weather, and there's not a 50-degree day for quite a while.
Until February, which is rare for us here.
Yes.
Sure. But hey, man, after the summer we had, we could use a little bit of cold.
It doesn't matter what the weather is, we're going to complain about it.
Fair enough. All right, Ken wants to know, what reference do you use, Tim, for the history and hybridization of camellias?
I looked it online.
Okay.
I did find some on the Camellia Society, I believe.
It's a good site. There's a lot of great books out there.
There isn't a book. It was actually on the Camellia Society. They had references to some of Cliff Parks, who was our local plantsman or botanist. Actually, he's now passed away, but he wrote the book on camellias, and he was David Parks' father of Camellia Forest, and. There was a book, and I don't know if we have it in the collection here at the Arboretum, but they had it in say around 2006-07, I think it came out. And that would be a really good reference if you wanted to get into some of the more, the species, as well as he goes into the history in that as well, I believe, so.
Awesome. Jared says, well, he would like to know, is there anyone still specifically breeding for cold hardiness in camellias? He says he knows the Ackerman hybrids, as that's all he can reliably grow in central Pennsylvania, and he's just wondering if anybody you know is doing further breeding in this area.
I don't know offhand, but
they were still doing some at Longwood Gardens. Other than that, I really don't know. The Holden Arboretum looked at it years ago.
In Ohio?
Yeah, but they had no.
I can't see them growing there because that's close to where I'm from.
No, but I worked in the Delaware Valley for a long stretch of time, and Longwood had always done a lot with cold hardy ones. We're on the edge here for cold. I mean, we can grow a lot of them here, but. Yeah. We can get away with so much here that I don't even. Dr. Parks did some breeding, I think, and Barry Yinger made selections, but he's no longer in the United States. So, and that was actually in central Reading. So I would actually check with Camellia Forest. They're going to be tapped into that.
No doubt.
In that Camellia world.
For sure. Okie
Or
dokie.
the folks at Cam too.
Yeah.
Well, Marilyn wants to know if there are any Sasanquas which can be used as foundation plants, which she's saying under 4 feet.
I would. I can't think of the names offhand, but maybe not Sasanqua, but as I said earlier,
all the green. The October series.
Those are Sasanquas. Yes, those are great ones.
Yeah, for sure.
Aside from that, some of the Hymalis, like Shishigashira and Greens Blue. Our Greens Blue out in the garden is probably about 5 feet tall, but I've never pruned it.
Okay.
And it's been there probably, I'm going to say 12 or 14 years anyways, maybe longer. It's dense. I mean, it would be perfect for a foundation plant.
I've looked and looked and looked, but I couldn't find. I had a planting of Shishigashira in Charlotte that was overplanted, and we used it as a demo for pruning to show the correct way to prune camellias. And it really took severe pruning because we had to keep it in bounds in a very small area. So that's one that I would recommend too, because you can do pretty much anything to that and not sacrifice the blooms on it. They really, if you think about the production of tea, that's what they're doing.
I had a picture of that. But they just shear them and they reflush. So yeah.
Okie dokie. Anne wants to know, at what temperature do we need to wrap to prevent the cold from killing the plant?
So it depends where you're at too.
I really don't like to do that. I'm not a strong advocate of doing that because you're never going to get ahead of the weather. It's best to try to grow things that are hardy to here. And in a lot of cases, you really don't need to do that.
Yeah, as long as it's well established. The only reference I saw, again, I was reading an article about growing them for more or less Maryland North, where they are on the edge. And they were saying the first winter after you planted them, you might wrap them.
Yeah.
Just to make sure they got established and didn't get desiccated too bad until they got well established.
Sure.
But in our area, unless it's
really don't need to.
You don't need to, unless it's some crazy cultivar or species that is not hardy here.
If you live somewhere where that is an issue, or if there's going to be some astronomical weather event where it's going to dip really low, having some remay fabric, doing it before the temperature dips.
That was another thing I saw whenever I was reading another one, and it was mentioning that the freeze of 1985, whenever it went I think they said it went to 10 where they were at. This was on coastal Virginia, I believe. We went to -9 here. It was -10 there. So yeah. And that's the all-time record for Raleigh, where a lot of things got totally wiped out.
Yeah.
And
I don't think Facebook's going to do much for that.
they said they looked at, if it was warm a few days beforehand, if within, I guess they said 70 some hours beforehand, it was warm up until the bottom dropped out. But if they had been able to, protect them, like wrap them, keep them cooler from coming out of their dormancy, they were a little bit better off. And you plant them on the north side of a building where they don't get the morning sun.
There's not as much transition.
They stay dormant. If you can keep them dormant, you're fine. So,
are deer an issue? And if so, how do you prevent them?
Deer are an issue. At least where I used to live here in Raleigh, they were an issue. I don't have a garden.
Yeah,
outside.
I got a bunch of. I went down to visit Bobby Green and came back with a whole bunch of his new ones and planted them in a new part of the garden, and the deer made short work of them.
They like that caffeine.
That had to have been what it was. You can try some of the deer repellents and be consistent with that. We were just talking with Mark on Monday about the method that he mentions with the fish line. He's had a lot of problems with deer in his home garden, and that's pretty much, knock on wood, dried it up. Fencing is the only thing that's 100%. And if you've got a small enough garden where you can do the deer fence that's at least 8 feet tall, that's about the only thing that's going to keep deer from eating stuff in your garden. There's a lot of home remedies out there. We did a big trial where I used to work on all those things just to prove that they didn't work. But there's a couple of deer repellents that work pretty good, but you got to reapply them consistently.
Absolutely.
We've had problems here with other nibblers.
Rabbits.
Rabbits have been horrible.
And most of the time I plant them when they're larger.
For the rabbits.
They go for the smaller things typically
rabbits.
Initially. So.
Okay, well this has to be the last question. There's a lot of time here. Okay, so when's the best time to propagate?
Isn't it after September-ish? After they've hardened off.
Yeah.
And through spring, I think. I've done them in the winter. But you don't want them when they're in a fresh flush, say between.
It's counterintuitive. You would think you'd want that
April
tender growth, and you don't.
Or maybe late March through August. There's probably not a great time to do it. I have taken cuttings and they just kind of sat there.
Yeah.
And until that growth kind of hardened.
Yeah.
But I think September on is what they typically would say.
And pretty successful.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they're actually not, at least japonicas aren't terribly difficult to root. You can take one leaf with a node and root it, and that was my first attempt.
Yeah.
Here at the garden. Someone brought us in a pretty one called Lois Coker, which is a formal double, and it was had it on the front desk, and my first assistant and we went and chopped off the bottom 6 inches and made about 10 cuttings, and I got 6 or 8 of them to root.
Oh, nice.
And that was just with individual leaves.
No kidding. That's awesome.
And that was January of 2006, so.
Cool.
That was my first venture into Camellia.
No doubt. Awesome. Well, that is all of the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Greg and Tim, for pulling this together. I know we barely scratched the surface, but that was an exhaustive scratching of the surface.
That was an aggressive scratch.
I didn't even get to talk about the Camellia azaleas.
Honestly, that's okay. Maybe next time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the Midweek program. We will be back next week. Our curator, Dennis, will be diving into the pharmacy in your plants, the interesting compounds that can be made from your ornamental plants.
Camellia.
Yeah.
Caffeine.
Should be all kinds of interesting. We will see you all next time. Y'all take care.